The reading is from the book of Habakkuk, and it's the first few verses. So, the chapter 1, first few verses. The oracle that the prophet Habakkuk saw. O Lord, how long shall I cry for help, and you will not listen, or cry to you violence, and you will not save? Why do you make me see wrongdoing and look at trouble? Destruction and violence are before me. Strife and contention arise. So the law becomes slack and justice never prevails. The wicked surround the righteous. Therefore judgment comes forth perverted. Look at the nations and see. Be astonished, be astounded. For work is being done in your days that you would not believe if you were told.
So the second reading today comes from Habakkuk, continuing, but from chapter 3. O God, I have heard of your renown, and I stand in awe, O God, of your work. In our own time, revive it. In your own time, make it known. In wrath, may you remember mercy. God came from Teman, the Holy One from Mount Paran. God's glory covered the heavens, and the earth was full of God's praise. In fury you trod the earth. In anger you trampled the nations. You came forth to save your people, to save your anointed. You crushed the head of the wicked house, laying it bare from foundation to roof. You pierced with their own arrows the head of the warriors, who came like a whirlwind to scatter us, gloating as if ready to devour the poor who were in hiding. You trampled the sea with your horses, churning the mighty waters. I hear, and I tremble within. My lips quiver at the sound. Rottenness enters into my bones, and my steps tremble beneath me. I wait quietly for the day of calamity to come upon the people who attack us. Though the fig tree does not blossom, and no fruit is on its vines, though the produce of the olive fails, and the fields yield no fruit, though the flock is cut off from the fold, and there is no herd in the stalls, yet will I exult in God. I will exult in the God of my salvation. God is my strength, and makes my feet like the feet of a deer, and makes me tread upon the heights. To the leader with stringed instruments. So there's a reason for my madness of choosing the same passage this week as I did last week. Because when we have heard it, last week when we heard it fresh, it felt like it was a full-bodied response from the congregation. I think I've rarely read a scripture passage where people go, oh, whoa, that's like today. Now, there were comments throughout the week then about how relevant that passage was, about what a great description for our current state of affairs, even though it was written almost 3,000 years ago, likely between 610 and 605 BCE. I even did some research on it this week. And since last week, I've had several conversations with people as they've asked, what do you think is going on? What is God doing? So today, I want to take some time to reflect on that a bit. Because as we've watched executive orders unfold that seem harsh, seem against what many of us stand for, as we see people being deported to black sites, as we see students snatched in the streets by hooded ICE agents, as we watch Signalgate, if you will, unfold, and security seemingly overcome by convenience or hubris, many of us have wondered that question, what in the world is going on? And as Lynn read again today, the prophet seems to capture much of what many of us have cried out, why do you make me see wrongdoing and look at trouble? Destruction and violence are before me. Strife and contention arise, so the law becomes slack and justice never prevails. The wicked surround the righteous, therefore judgment comes forth perverted. Any vibing with that? Any connection to that? So with that, I want to reflect a bit on how I see what is happening in our country and our world for your reflection as well. So recently, it seems like I've been talking a lot about change as individuals. We're in this Lenten season. I've talked about shifting towards God and allowing Spirit to shift us, mold us, transform us. And this kind of movement is often needed not just for individuals. It's often needed for larger communities, churches, companies, nations, our world at large. And it's about time that our country faces into its need to deeply change. So let's look at some of the signs that I see, I think that some of us see. Number one, we're clearly wrestling with oligarchy and the elite asserting strong men to buttress their power, not just here in the United States, but around the world. Two, clearly against Jesus' teachings, as a country, we highlight and we celebrate rich folks. Our banks promote, have you noticed this change? Wealth management instead of just money management. So when we see Trump and Bezos and Musk all hanging out and leading and influencing the country, it hopefully shows us clearly the system that we're all a part of. That on some level we've all embraced. This is a part of the United States. Number three, we have built this country on colonialism. We've taken land from the indigenous people. We've taken resources from other countries really well. So when our president speaks of taking over Greenland, instead of having a heart attack, like what in the heck's he talking about, hopefully we can allow it to show us something that we still haven't fully faced as a country. We still haven't repented from as a country. We still have not changed as a country. Tariffs may fall into that category as well. Punishing other countries, supposedly for their unfair treatment of the United States. Poor United States. The richest, most powerful country in the world. We're such a victim. So too bad. Number four, when we look at our history, we have liked to present ourselves as the great shining city on the hill. We've heard that, right? We talk about the moral compass of the world as enforcer and upholder of democracy and freedom. Yet when we look through the understanding of Spirit, all these terms are illusions. Ask other countries their perspective on the United States, and you get something very different than those. And we've always tried to control the story that we've told and the history that we have learned in this country. So when we hear that the Department of Education is being dismantled, that DEI programs are being punished, and the Smithsonian is even under fire for racially charged exhibits, and I challenge you to see actually what exhibits they're talking about because they're amazing. All of this is the same pattern of obscuring the full truth about who we are as a country. So when we say what's going on, in some ways this is the same old, folks. Now, it's just more out there. It's more visible. It's more in our face. And I would argue it's a little more scary. But none of these four things that I've mentioned are new. But are we willing to see the signs, to see them clearly, and to see what they tell us? So there's several spiritual principles that I'd like to highlight today to help us to see this more clearly. The first is an old saying that when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. People heard that one? One very advanced way of seeing the people who bug us the most, who annoy us to no end, who drive us absolutely crazy, is to see them as our next teacher. They are just the ones who are telling us what we need to work on within us. They're the ones who are highlighting what is angsty about us, that needs work, what we really need to address. They're the ones that point out a lot of what could lead us to greater wholeness, to lead us to deeper wisdom, to help us focus on our baggage and our stuff of what needs our work. And our current administration is a brilliant teacher. Truly. Now, we may not like it. I get it. I don't like it. But that's irrelevant, isn't it? It's a great teacher of who we are. They show us all our country's flaws quite clearly. What are we going to do with them? Are we willing to look? Are we willing to learn from the flaws and then work on them? Or we can ignore, we can deflect, we can just continue on, we can keep saying we're the greatest country the world's ever known. And we will keep going just the way we've always gone. Because that is one of our patterns as a country. We just keep going. We ignore, we deflect, we move on. The teacher is showing us everything we need to see. And if we can take lessons from Habakkuk, the prophetic voice, what it does is it sees it for what it really is and it calls it out. Calls it to change towards a path of unity, of holiness, of connectedness with others and with God. A huge part of the role of the prophet is to call out the reality of the system or the structure that is unjust, that is abusing the majority of folks not in power, that is not living in the ways of God. I would argue that is exactly what's needed here and now. And sorry if it makes you uncomfortable, but that's what I feel like part of my role is to goose you enough so that you see it, so that we all see it, so that we can deal with it. And I am slow to figure this out, but as I listen to friends and colleagues, I am more and more clear that this is how things have actually always been in this country. We just haven't been able to see it, or face it, or make the changes needed. So many people in this country say that this is exactly how things have always been, particularly those who are not straight, white men. When will we take off our blinders and tell the truth about who this country has been and still is? We all know it at some level. And if we don't know it by now, I invite you to watch the news just for a couple of nights. It's really clear right now. And if you can, set aside your frustration or your anger just for a little bit to see what's really happening. Those are clues, all right? Those are welcome emotions that tell us something. And set them aside just for a little bit and try to watch through the lens of Jesus' call to love your neighbor as yourself. And see what you see. See what you see. Another tool that can help us get to that deeper way is that in spiritual formation teaching, there's an understanding of 5 stages of formation. 5 stages. There's awakening, there's purgation, there's illumination, there's dark night, and there's union. To get to the union and the deeper levels of connectedness, guess what? We have to go through the other stages. And they don't feel good. They are uncomfortable for us. And they don't necessarily go in any particular order, the 5 that I mentioned. But what we may now be experiencing is a purgation of some kind. A getting rid of the old thing that's cluttering us up, that's getting in our way. It may overlap into a dark night where we're listening for God, just like the prophet. We're crying out to God, and yet there's no connection that we feel. Because the old ways that we used to connect aren't working anymore. They've run their course. So we have to find this new way, this new thing. God has to show us a new thing, and we haven't got there yet. And if we're wondering about the old ways of doing things that are coming to an end, isn't the climate crisis telling us that it's time? The old way of dealing with the climate has to come to an end. Our failed way of capitalism is telling us this. When 5 people, the 5 richest people, if all they did was pay the taxes that they owe, the rest of the United States would be lifted out of poverty. Let that sink in for a second. If the 5 richest people paid the taxes that they owe, the rest of the nation could be lifted out of poverty, above the poverty line. That was one stat that I heard this week. That's crazy. It's amazing. One thing we found in the last election is that a huge amount of people were angry and scared with how things currently are, and they desperately wanted change. And the candidate who presented themselves most convincingly as the candidate who would change things in Washington won. I'm convinced of that. And wow, are we seeing change? Again, we may not like it. We may be really uncomfortable with it, and I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. Because it shows us where our values lie. It shows us what we stand for. Clearly, it is a purging of an old system. And I know it scares the pants off of some of us because we're not sure of what the new thing is. We don't know where this is going to go. And I join you in worrying about not knowing where this is going to go. And the challenge is, can we help guide it? This thing's being purged. Can we help guide it? Get in sync with God to help guide this in a better direction. To get on board with God. To take a stance to say, we are people of spirit and we're going to try to push this thing. We're going to try to encourage our leaders. We're going to stand up and protest. We're going to talk the talk and walk the walk to try and get this country to a better place. Once the purging has happened, once things have, the dust is settling, how do we push it in a better direction? How do we work more fully towards union with God, with our LGBTQ plus brothers and sisters, with people of color who've been ostracized from the systems and structures of power through time? One other tool, it may not even be a tool, but one other vision, way of seeing this thing, is through some historical perspective. I was talking with somebody who has studied history, who said that every 80 years or so, there seems to be some major upheaval in this country. There was a civil war after about 80 years. Civil war. After another 80 years is World War II, and after about another 80 years, guess what? We're right about where we are now. Interesting, isn't it? Some of you know the theologian Phyllis Tickle. I've talked about her before. She pointed out that every 500 years or so, there's a major upheaval in the church. The Council of Nicaea and the church becoming the Church of Empire, around 500. The Great Schism and the split between East and West in the church happened around 1000. Anybody guess when the Great Reformation happened? Shockingly, right at 1500. And where are we now? Right around 2000, we don't know what that's about yet. But the institutional church is definitely changing. Definitely changing. It's worth looking at these rhythms. It's worth holding them to say there is change happening and those two things are coming together in our lifetime. What an opportunity. And holy Moses, hold on tight. Buckle up. So I think it quite clearly what is happening is that we are laying in a bed that collectively we have made. And we are seeing the consequences of it in real time. And we can all kind of, I can shuck and jive and just say, I wasn't really a part of this, I did this. No, it happened on my watch too. I didn't speak up loud enough. I didn't push hard enough, clearly. All the decisions that have been made over decades and generations in this country have clearly led us to this point. And we have to face into it. And we have to be ready to work to push our leaders in that direction of unity, in the direction of holiness, in the direction of community. I was reminded of a Buddhist saying this week that what we do to one person, we do to all people. That sense of community, that as I care for you, it's a part of caring for everybody. As I abuse you, I abuse the whole system, I abuse everybody. We have to realize the connectedness of who we are and what we're about. That's what Jesus called us to over and over again as community. And whether we like it or not, whether we're ticked or joyful that this is the time we live in, is totally irrelevant. We're in it. We're absolutely in it. It's what is upon us, and it's what's before us. So can we be those who continue, like the prophet in the end, to watch long enough to see the work that is being done in our days by our God? Can we be those who join the prophet in the midst of the chaos, continue to proclaim and look for God's faithfulness? Can we be those who exalt this God of presence and hope? Can we know at the core of our being that God is our strength? And can we hold on to that today in all our days? Amen? Amen.